Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this special show on Salam Media that looks at the World Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia and Related Intolerance, a long name for a conference that took place 20 years ago in 2001, September 2001, in Durban. And now, 20 years later, there are lots of activities that are taking place in various parts of the world to reflect on what happened in Durban 2001. 20 years later, South Africa is leading an event at the United Nations to reflect back on Durban 2001. Various civil society groups around the world are having similar kinds of events. Different groups focusing on different aspects of the Durban 2001 event, and looking at what it means, what it meant then, what it has meant over the past 20 years, and what it will mean going forward, and whether the kinds of decisions taken in Durban are still relevant, whether the situation for the groups that were discussed in Durban, September 2001, has improved or not improved, etc. The World Conference Against Racism, Xenophobia and Related Intolerance, or WCAR, as it was popularly known, was actually two conferences, as many of these United Nations events are. There was the official government conference that took place in Durban, and across the road or a little down the road from the government conference was a civil society conference. Of all the civil society conferences that are attached to UN governmental conferences, this one in Durban was probably the most vibrant, most active, most energetic, both inside the conference halls as well as on the streets. Certainly, civil society, both South African and non-South African, in Durban in September 2001, decided that this was a space that they wanted to use as much as possible. The fallout from the two conferences has been also quite immense, and we will talk about some of that as we go along, from different sectors, from different governments, civil society sectors, etc. And that was seen already in the course of the two conferences. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so looking back and reflecting at some of those, some of what happened in Durban in September 2001. And we will be looking at what that means for us today, 20 years later, in 2021. We have four guests to discuss this with us. Let me introduce them all quickly before we start talking to them. Our first guest is Roshan Dadoo. Roshan, at the time, in 2001, was a deputy director at the Department of Foreign Affairs, as it was then called, now called Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO. Currently, she has not been with government for quite a while. She is currently the national coordinator of the South African BDS Coalition, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Coalition. Second guest is Thembisa Fakude. Thembisa was both on the streets and in the conference halls in 2001 in Durban. Currently, he is a senior fellow at the organization called Africa-Asia Dialogues. Third guest is Saydoon Nisa Sayed. Saydoon's from Durban and a member of the African Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum Steering Committee. She was also in Durban at the civil society event in 2001. And finally, we have Raji Sourani. We're very pleased to be able to get Raji Sourani to join us today. Raji is from Gaza, and he came to Durban from Gaza in 2001. These days, Gaza is under siege. We're not sure that his internet connection will last or his electricity will last. But despite all that, Raji agreed to join us to reflect on that conference as well. So Raji, Saydoon, Tembisa, Roshan, thank you very much for making time to for all of you who were at those conferences in 2001, to look back at what those conferences meant at the time and what they mean now. Shukran, thank you for being with us. Let's get straight into it, and let's start with Roshan, the erstwhile foreign affairs diplomat and official who ditched government to join civil society. Thank you, Roshan, for choosing the right side. But if you put your old hat on, old scarf, old hijab on, why did South Africa decide to host that conference? And was it to South Africa's benefit to host that UN conference in 2001?
Thanks, Naeem. I don't think it's two sides of the same coin, maybe in some respects, especially I think at the time when South Africa was in 2001 still sort of re-entering the international arena after 1994. And I think it was very important and seen so around the world that South Africa was the host of the World Conference Against Racism. I think it's not only for South Africa, but for all the participants, as you know, also in the NGO forum, which is one of the most vibrant, which I think you've mentioned, NGO forums on the sidelines of a UN conference that I think there's ever been. And the NGO forum certainly impacted upon the government conference in a number of ways. So I think, yes, it was important. I think, unfortunately, there hasn't been follow-up either from South Africa or internationally on many of the issues discussed, although the official declaration did touch on issues, new issues that hadn't been in UN documents before. I think it was particularly a shame that South Africa itself only ratified its own plan of action, I think about 2 years ago. It took all that time before we, the hosts, actually ratified our plan of action. And one of the
we'll come to some of those dynamics, Roshan. But so, I mean, you being inside in DIRCO and being one of the rapporteurs in the government conference, what did South Africa hope to achieve out of this? I know that for DFA at the time and for President Thabo Mbeki, the whole experience was somewhat bruising. I mean, we think in a good way. But what did South Africa hope to achieve, not out of hosting the conference, because it's its own prestige, etc., but what are the things that South Africa wanted highlighted, decided upon, resolved at this conference that they were hosting?
I think one of the main issues was for South Africa as part of the Africa bloc, the question of reparations. And the ideas of Mbeki was to look at reparations as being not necessarily money going to individual countries or organizations even, but as part of funding of NEPAD at the time. So I think that was a big driving factor. Unfortunately, it also proved one of the big stumbling blocks, but that at the time was an important aspect to South Africa's foreign policy.
Yes, certainly was a big stumbling block. And as people who go to these conferences know, the civil society conferences, usually the agenda kind of mirrors the official government conference. So as reparations was a big big issue in the governmental conference, so it was in the civil society conference, and as almost as divisive as it was in the governmental conference, so it was in the civil society conference as well. And Roshan, we'll come back to talk a little more about that. But let me jump now to Raji. Raji, the other big divisive issue in 2001 was you people, the Palestinians. That became an issue on which governments pulled out of the governmental conference. on which even a couple of international NGOs walked out of sessions in the civil society conference. And despite all this, you know, we had a declaration. So there were two declarations, of course. There was a government declaration and plan of action that Roshan referred to, and there was the civil society declaration and plan of action. And you know, the civil society plan of action had two sections on Palestine and the Palestinians. And in the one section, it calls for the reinstitution of UN Resolution 3379, determining the practices of Zionism as racist practices, which propagate the racial domination of one group over another, etc., etc. And in other parts of that civil society declaration, refers in very strident language to Israel as a colonial state, as an apartheid state, as a racist state, etc. Now, Raji, you came all the way from Gaza. What was the plan of Palestinians? What did Palestinians expect they would get out of attending and participating in the civil society conference in Durban in 2001? Your mic is off, Raji. You're muted. Okay, that's better.
Thank you, Naeem, and thank you for having this session on the 20th anniversary. It's something very important and one of the landmarks of the Palestinian struggle against this Israeli belligerent criminal racist occupation. And I think to have the conference, the idea of having such conference in South Africa, that by itself was very, very symbolic and great message to be conveyed. Actually, you and your comrades and your colleagues and South Africa civil society played a major, vital role of making this success. They paid our attention, they supported us with all what's needed on the ground and in the level of connections, even internationally. For 1 year before the conference, we were coordinating with civil society organizations across the globe, in Africa, America, in Asia, in Europe, and this we attended. I mean, most of these conferences, continental conferences, and there was real good coordination on slavery, on casting, on other, and on the Palestinian issue. So there was real deep understanding for this. Besides all that, there was visits, I mean, to the occupied territories, and you have seen by your own eyes, I mean, what's going on here and what's happening. And this deep preparation, this deep interaction, this deep discussions, this deep solidarity, which has been created in a very strong chemistry, I would say, made our mission successful. I think as well, the coordination on the ground at the time of conference with the component of South Africa civil society and the real backing, which brought the fourth dimension for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, was very vital and needed. And I think the conference was a real opportunity to back each other causes and cases, and made the civil society conference unique, special, and a landmark. And everybody was stunned I think hundreds across the globe, world civil society organizations were in total agreement about the declaration. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, 17 civil society were in favor and in support of Israel vis-a-vis 1,100 organizations were in support of the Palestinian cause and others. There was very, very good organization, very good backing. The thematic work was done very well. The papers, the participants, the quality of participants, the activities inside the conference, and the demonstrations. I think that took, the attention of everybody. Though Americans were on the peak of their power, and they were able to twist not the arms but the necks of many states and made them like rubber stamp, including many Arab states, to sign on the American Western position. I think civil society and the declaration of the civil society were unique, special landmark, and it said all what it's needed to be said at the first World Conference Against Racism. For the first time at that conference, the voice was loud and clear. Israel racist society, Israel a new brand of apartheid. This
and you would remember
should be abolished, and world civil society in total support with Palestine and the Palestinian people and with Palestinian struggle to have an end for this new brand of apartheid, this racist state.
And Raji, as you would remember, the Palestinian flags
my
were.
last sentence. It wasn't strange that even Shimon Peres, he described the civil society declaration as one of the most strategical threats for the state of Israel. And I think Palestine was just on the right place, in the heart of people, in the heart of the conference. The solidarity was obvious, clear, not only with the flags, the newspapers, the media, everybody, even the enemies were not able, to cover that. So that was something very special, unique. And we, after the conference, immediately have joint meeting together with you and World Civil Society organizations. And we wanted to have the first World Conference on Palestine months after that, titled Israel, a New Brand of Apartheid. I left South Africa to begin preparing with that, but the real harm, which damaged all this, it was September 11th.
We'll come to that, Raji.
But this was unique.
And I just wanted to say that that huge march that took place, 25,000 people on the streets of Durban. The Palestinian issue was one of the main issues, and we, if you remember, symbolically at the end of the march, had this young girl from Dheisheh refugee camp who declared the launching of the international anti-apartheid movement against Israel. But we'll talk a little more about that. Let me go to Saydoon. Saydoon, you having been in Durban and been in Durban at that time as well, you were also part of a number of the activities that took place before the conference, in parallel to the conference, etc. Do you want to give us a sense of the kind of mood around the kind of upcoming conference and the way in which so many different civil society sectors were involved in preparing for and looking forward to that? As Raji said, a great deal of preparation all around the world, but particularly in Durban where the conference took place. and some of the activities associated?
At that time, I wore a different cap. I was part of the Religions for Peace, which is accredited to the United Nations, and it still is. So I was in both the conferences, the NGO sector as well as the government sector. But the most vibrant, most organized was the NGO sector. And I want to just concur with Raji about the unity that this conference brought about. One is we as South Africans just became a democracy. So we were so happy to host the conference, as well as we were looking towards addressing those challenges that we faced during apartheid and see how we can move forward. And as you rightly said, there were challenges, and the ratification of these things did not take place same time. But the government, the NGO sector and the march became something that really overwhelmed the world at that time. The press, the statements, the comradeship, and things that happened in 2001. But what we must also remember is that, yes, Palestine got a lot of focus, and people that didn't know about the conference became aware of it, because it's very often it is those that are part of organizations will normally attend these things, the NGO sector, the government. But laymen on the street became so engrossed in knowing what it was, because coming from apartheid and hosting a conference of this nature with the amount of people in our country was just overwhelming. And I think when I attended some of the government program, there was such shuffle and no proper discussion, whereas the NGO sector was so vibrant that everyone wanted to see changes in our own country, as well as the people that were in South Africa at the time. And I want to also concur, Palestine was highlighted, especially among all the other racism, xenophobia, and other things. Although we are in the African continent, this played a vital and a big part, and people just on the street got so excited about saying that we were part of the UN conference on racism and so on.
Saydoon, that second last point that you made, I think, is very important. That we often think of the Durban 2001 conference as being this conference that dealt with issues from other parts of the world. So Palestine, it's slavery and reparations related to slavery, the Dalits, Tibet, etc., etc. But certainly in the civil society part, and certainly on the streets, a big part of the agenda was South Africa. Tembisa, you'll remember that, and I remember you because you're so tall that your head sticks out above everyone else, in those marches, marching alongside people from the Anti-Privatization Forum, the Landless People's Movement. These were entirely South African agendas, saying that, yes, 6 years after our first democratic election, we are nowhere close to ending racism as such in South Africa. These are still issues that we need to deal with. I would think that if such a conference took place today, a big contingent there would also be migrants and refugees who are in South Africa that would be part of it. But Tembisa, these days it's kind of well known that this kind of, the term intersectionality that's often used. So if you talk about Palestinian solidarity, you talk about it in the same breath as you talk about Black Lives Matter. or as you talk about, other kinds of oppression. In 2001, this wasn't as accepted a thing. I don't know if you'd agree with me, Tembisa. And one of the things that Durban 2001 did was it put all of these agendas together as being all agendas that we all should take on. As Raji said, Palestinians got a new appreciation for the struggles of the descendants of slaves, or for the struggles of colonized people in Africa, just as the opposite happened. Just as South Africans who were in the landless peoples movement, for example, got a new appreciation of what the struggle of Palestinians meant. Just if you can just reflect on that for a moment, Tembisa, and also tell us about how this point that Raji made. The WCAR ended, I think it was the 8th of September. And 3 days later, the whole world changed and people forgot about all of these gains that were made in Durban. So 2 questions for you, Tembisa.
Well, thanks, Naeem. It's very nice to see all of you, especially Raji, who I've seen 20 years ago. It's good to see him again, still looking young. Yeah, so I agree with you. It was the beginning of a true international solidarity movement, the Durban Conference. And whenever you do research on anything that involves Palestine and Israel, there'll always be something written on why the Israelis or those who support the Israeli government must avoid another Durban conference. So that
the Durban hate fest, as they still call it, Tembisa.
Yeah. So they mention it all the time. Whenever you do a research to say we need to avoid a repeat of a Durban event. So it was the beginning of a true international solidarity movement. But as you correctly say, Naeem, it brought everyone together. We have everyone in South Africa. In fact, I remember some of the Muslims in South Africa getting worried about this new international movement might just put us in a corner, because how will we act, or how will we react when the gays and homosexual movements come and ask for solidarity since they've supported us? We would have been expected to reciprocate the gesture. So that was another side discussion behind closed doors, because it was the new movement. But of course, some of us who had clear heads did not see any challenge with that. We felt that it was an appropriate solidarity movement, and it had to accommodate everyone. And we need to begin to realize that all the struggles of people of the world will indirectly or directly impact on all of us. So it was a very, very important formation of a new movement. But importantly, Naeem, is that you and I found ourselves a couple of days later in both Palestine and Israel. And in fact, when
on the 11th of September, we were in a bus in Tel Aviv. Yes. When we suddenly heard helicopters overhead, etc. Yeah,
correct. So when September 11 happened, we were in Tel Aviv proper, just across the road from King David Hotel. And I remember we were supposed to leave on the same day, and they canceled our flight because of whatever reasons. And I was afraid because they kept our luggage at the airport. And some of us were afraid that they might just plan certain things that will keep us in Israeli jail forever, but it didn't happen. We ended up back at home in South Africa. So it was a really beginning of something big, which led or culminated into a proper solidarity movement. And as Raji said,
what was the effect of that September 11th on this new budding movement?
Well, that's what I was thinking about a couple of days ago, as Afghanistan continues to reveal itself, the new dispensation, that if you really think about it, if it wasn't because of the September 11 event in New York, I think the Israelis would have found themselves in a very difficult position and in some corner, isolated by the entire world, because it was clear after that declaration was made, particularly by the civil society, that Israel was alone. And it had no choice but to begin to look at how it continued to treat the Palestinians. So the September 11 event shifted the entire limelight into a new war on terror. And if it didn't happen, I think we'll be probably talking something different currently about what's happening in both Gaza and the West Bank.
So I want to encourage listeners and viewers to just check on the internet. You'll find that civil society declaration, WCAR Civil Society Declaration. It's really illuminating reading. I read it again today, 20 years later, and it's quite something to look back at these things that were resolved and decided on 20 years ago. Roshan, if you can just give us a little bit of the kind of yes, you're still with us. Some of the dynamics and difficulties. I mean, you were part of the South African government delegation. You're also a rapporteur. And I would imagine that some of these European, North American governments had a particularly negative attitude towards the South Africans who engineered this whole thing, etc. Did you find any of that kind of intimidation, suspicion, whatever, from other governmental delegations in the course of your work? I know you signed the Official Secrets Act, so maybe you can't say everything, but whatever you can.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think the point that was made about the discussions not being vibrant in these government conferences, most of the contentious discussions take place inside negotiations. And the most difficult one was around reparations for the slave trade, basically, which the Africa bloc was quite, as I recall, was very together and strong on. But I think it was after America had walked out, it was Canada, they were called JUSCAN, the group they formed, Japan, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and the European Union. And they would not give an inch. The negotiations went on an entire night without resulting in any agreement. And in fact, after the negotiations ended, when it was still without proper agreement, there was some agreement on some of the points. The Europeans were shouting, and these are the senior delegations, shouting and screaming and trying to intimidate people like me who were taking notes to change things in the notes. They were really, really adamant that they were not going to see any form of reparations. It was actually quite extraordinary, the strong position they took. But I think it's also worth saying that because of this issue, which America definitely didn't want to have to make any movement on, the issue of Palestine and the fact that Israel was always going to walk out because there is no way you can find common language that's going to satisfy both parties, especially when it's related to racism, because there's no getting around the fact that Zionism is racism. So there isn't a way in which you could find, or the chair, South Africa could find a common ground. So it was clear Israel would walk out. But that was a pretext for America to walk out, because then they didn't have to deal with the issue of reparations. So I think it suited both of them, in fact, for their own reasons, as well as because obviously America was going to support Israel. So there was a kind of a convergence there in the walking out of both of those parts.
This is a very, very interesting, well, two interesting points among all the others, Roshan, that you're mentioning. The one is this thing of, in a sense, the US used the Palestinian issue as an excuse to get away from taking responsibility for slavery. You know, on the one hand. The other hand, this usual tactic of the Americans. You spoke about that last night, where it was all-night meetings with the JUSCAN group, etc. By that point, the Americans had pulled out. But the usual tactic of the Americans in such negotiations is they push hard, water down the resolution. I mean, from what the original resolution was coming from South Africa, water it down to a point where it can't be watered down any further, and then they pull out. So even that watered down version, they don't sign on to, and by that point, of course, you can't strengthen it anymore. So, you know, both of these very interesting tactics from the Americans, I think, there. Was there any official fallout for the South African government?
Well, I think it was certainly not what the South African government wanted. And I think there was a belief that they could find a way to word the declaration that would suit the Israelis as well as the group. I think it was the Organization of Islamic Conference in the preparatory meetings that had initially put the Palestinian resolution. But in fact, I was working on the Israel-Palestine desk, and we were called in the middle of the night, I think twice, to try to find a way to find language that would basically accommodate Israel. And we were saying, but you can't. It's not about the language. There's no way you can find language in the context of this declaration that would be acceptable to both sides. So that's when it was clear Israel would walk out and then America. And I think that was a shock in a way to the government. I think they believed, I would say naively, that it would be possible to broker the peace in terms of the resolution. And so
Roshan, before you continue, let me just say that and we advertised this as well, that one of our guests was going to be Marcia Andrews. Marcia Andrews was the head of the South African NGO Coalition, which was the South African host of the Civil Society Forum. And unfortunately, Marcia is not very well, so she pulled out earlier today. But I'm just told that she's on the line now, and we'll hear an audio of her. So let's just take her very quickly, if the others don't mind. Marcia, thank you despite your ill health, for joining us. I think it's extremely important that we have you in this discussion. So we've had 45 minutes of discussion around this, but if you can just give us your thoughts, Marcia, about why that, particularly the civil society part of WCAR in 2001, why was it as revolutionary in a sense as it was, and has it meant anything for us 20 years later? Why was it as revolutionary in a sense as it was, and has it meant anything for us 20 years later?
So I don't know if you can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks for having me in the session. So it's really good to be in the session with all of you, and great to see Raji and Jeenah. So all of you, I'm really good to be in the session with all of you, and great to see Raji and Jeenah. So all of you, I'm really so. It seems to be a duplication of what I'm saying. I'm not sure what's happening.
Yes, someone has two devices, I think, and we're hearing an echo. So whoever that might be, if you can switch off your second device, that will help us. Marcia, do you have another device where you're listening to this? Maybe
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, better, yes.
So I think there are a couple of important points that we should all think about. And I'm sure you and the South Africans remember that apart from us organizing the civil society, the NGO space, it was an important initiative from our side, and particularly the activists in South Africa. And there was an establishment of a Durban social forum, if you can recall. It was this Durban social forum, I think, that helped us mobilize activists across Durban, but also across South Africa, the Landless People's Movement, all the different kinds of movements that participated. So it was really, I think, a vibrant moment in South Africa. I also think that there were some critical issues that we must remember, and particularly perhaps Roshan can comment on this, but and so can Raji, because we had to deal with the UN who attempted to have a kind of hierarchy of what they thought were the exploitations that we had to deal with. I remember a meeting that we had with Mary Robinson, who said, "What kind of African are you? You're wanting to put Palestine before the plight of African peasants who are discriminated against every day, etc." So they tried to find the softer issues that they could put on the agenda, as opposed to dealing with some of the more contentious political issues. I think the South African team, the fact that we had really built a common agenda with the Palestinian comrades, we managed, I think, to pull through in the way that we did, both inside the forum and outside. And I think the outside spaces really encouraged us to really be strong. I think we expected more at the time from many of our leaders, whether it was Fidel Castro, whether it was Thabo Mbeki, etc. Sometimes I think it's unfortunate that they didn't rise to the occasion. But in any case, I think these are critical things that we must reflect on. Why didn't they? There are two things that I want to just remind us of. And Naim, you'll know this, Raji, you will know this well as also, is that the Durban, this WCAR gave us an indication of the strength of the Zionist lobby across wherever we went, where we thought we could build alliances with the Roma. There were just blockages of how the Zionist lobby had penetrated so many sectors of civil society. And I think we were taken aback by the strength of this lobby. Some of it we didn't expect. Where we thought we could make gains, we were blocked at many, many different levels. I still think that today, more than ever, we need to begin to look at the declaration that was agreed on. We need to begin to ask ourselves, how do we reorganize ourselves today? We're all in a different place 20 years down the line. The South African social movement, they know where they were 20 years ago. The global movement, the World Social Forum, all these movements are on the back foot. And so the challenges that we face today, 20 years later, perhaps is, for me, where I'd like us to begin to focus on. What do we do to rebuild this capacity to unite, to have global solidarity, to push forward a less agenda? Much of that, I think we've lost. And so I'm one of the activists who believe that the time now is for us to begin to rebuild, to think afresh on some of the issues that we spoke about 20 years ago, and to look forward. What do we do today to take us to where we were 20 years ago? So the lessons are many. Yeah, I stop this for now.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Marcia, are you going to stay, or do you want to leave and take a break?
I'm listening to the debate all the time, so I'm happy to just be in the background. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marcia.
And
Thanks.
Tommy, for having me. Take care.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the point at which we are, is that 20 years later now, what is the meaning of all of that? Marcia is painting a picture that is not entirely rosy, that in a sense, on many of these issues, we have gone backwards. And I tend to agree with her on certain points.
Yeah.
At the same time, for example, we have advances in other aspects of the solidarity movement. We spoke about the intersectionality. We now have a Pan-African Palestine Solidarity Network, which never existed before. Roshan, at the governmental level, South Africa is determined to make a go of this Durban Plus 20 meeting at the UN, and to place Palestine and apartheid front, left, and center, or right, left, and center in that. So there's I agree that there's been many kind of back slips, but here and there are possibilities of moving forward. What do you think, Raji? Have we gone backwards? Have we gone forwards? And how are we moving from 2020 on?
I just want to remind everybody how was the situation in 2001 when Durban conference took place. The occupation, and Sharon especially was on the peak of his offense on the occupied territories. The second Intifada began, and they began, real bloody military operations, whether in Jerusalem, West Bank, in Gaza, and they, for the first time ever at their history, they began to use Apache helicopters, F-16s, tanks, land-to-land rockets against Palestinian civilians and civilian targets. The level of killings and injuries and destruction, unprecedented. The siege of villages, camps, it came to incredible level. Settlements activities was bold, land confiscation, never ever. It was as such, they began to open the bypass roads and try to impose de facto situation using this situation. But things definitely, since then, deteriorating till the siege of President Arafat at the Muqata, and then his poisoning at his headquarters and death. And this is, actually going on, and the Israelis, with no doubt, created on the ground policy of ethnic cleansing. For Palestinians, especially, in East Jerusalem, Judaization for Jerusalem, and taking over more and in the West Bank, and imposing, de facto apartheid system, which making, two-state solution, even mission impossible if things, just continue as it is. In Gaza, never ever in a summer dream we thought, things can deteriorate to this level. 4 wars, has been launched in the eye of the storm. In each war, civilian and civilian targets. We are disconnected for the last 20 years from the world. There is entire generation doesn't know the other. They didn't leave. Unemployment, poverty, destruction, death. Smell everywhere. And simply, they are sending simple, clear message. You don't exist for us, and you have to leave. They want to clean the land from us.
Thank you, Raji.
There is real conspiracy of silence by Europe. They are doing nothing. There is full, absolute backing by the American administration to the Israeli government, unprecedented. I don't want to repeat once again what Trump did and what Biden actually is doing, which is not with big difference. Nobody now talking about end of occupation. Nobody talking about self-determination. Nobody talking about independence. Nobody talking about Palestinian state. They are talking about how to bring food, vaccine, how Israel allowed the vaccination, to come of COVID-19 to the occupied territories, how they allow this or that item, how they allow partially freedom of movement with the outside world. So
in many ways, the situation is worse. Huh?
But it's no doubt that we are in the worst situation ever. I can say more. We are in the process of second Nakba, and they want you to give up. You have no hope. You have to lose hope.
Raji, thank you, Raji. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left, so let me just get the others in. But let me just say,
I want to say, Naeem, the following: nobody can take the hope of our hearts and minds. Our determination very, very strong. We've proven all the crimes this occupation committed, and there is investigation opened at the ICC. I'm leading the Palestinian legal team there, and the investigation already decided, and there is investigative team for this. We have the moral superiority in a criminal, belligerent, racist occupation, and I'm sure that we are the stones of the valley. We have enough solidarity across the globe. Things cannot continue like this. Strategic optimism, part of our heart and mind and strategy. We are stronger with you and your solidarity.
Shukran, inshallah. Thank you, Raji. Strategic optimism, I think, is a good point. Let me just remind us all, before you say them, that while we were at the World Conference Against Racism on the 27th of August 2001, during the conference, Abu Ali Mustafa, the head of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was assassinated on the 27th of August while we were at the conference. So it was a very emotional day for many of the Palestinian delegates. I saw grown men fighters break down crying. Saydoon, moving forward, are we in a better position, worse position? Where do we go? In 30 seconds, if you can.
I think we are in a worse position. You have seen what happened recently in Durban and areas. I think what happened is from apartheid, we became democracy and we take it for granted. We can live in freedom and enjoy non-racism and brother comradeship, etc. But it's not so. It's what's in our mind. And I think, we need to re-educate people on many of these challenges. But I just wanted to come on to one. When Roshan was speaking, when the Americans walked out, there was another racism in the conference where there were Afro-Americans who were still behind, and they were jeered at because they had no voice left in the conference because of the so-called, and again in inverted commas, the color that went in that part of it. And another point is we South Africans gave so much of support to Palestinians that, we're supposed to, at the end of the conference, step back and say we have all these challenges in our own backyard. And we did very little about it. Many of us work in the NGO sector. We did something, but many of us didn't. So I think we need to look at how we move forward better, addressing all the challenges that we face. Thank you, Naeem.
Tembisa, is the future looking more optimistic or not, in general, on all these issues? I don't want you to speak about each issue, but in 30 seconds. You're muted, Tembisa.
Be unmuted by then. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was supposed to be unmuted by then, but anyway, in terms of Palestine Solidarity, I think things are much better given the technology. We've seen how solidarity on social media, for example, on the Palestinian issues have grown and proliferated So I think in that regard, the Palestinian Solidarity has grown and continues to grow, and we've got now, lone activists, who are doing amazing work in terms of propagating the cause of the Palestinians. But regarding other social causes, I agree certainly with Saydoon. Things are much worse. Again, because all of us who have kind of retreated into our own small little enclaves. There is no encouragement of street and pavement activism no more. All of us are sitting behind our telephones, and that has further kind of segregated us and divided us in terms of pushing forward with social justice internationally.
In the spirit of strategic optimism, Raji, let me also say, however, that, for example, the movement for Black Lives in the US, but a movement that is, in a sense, global, didn't exist in 2001. It does now. So I think that there are losses and reversals and gains. Let me give the last word to Marcia. Reversals and gains, Marcia, where are we going forward? And Marcia, many of us, of course, on the Palestinian issue have been extremely critical of the South African government. Right now, the South African government is pushing for this Durban Plus 20 conference. It's pushing on the issue of apartheid in the United Nations, things that it hasn't done in the past. In fact, it's only now decided to ratify the Convention on Apartheid, but has suddenly woken to the importance of apartheid to Palestine, etc. Are we seeing something positive here in general and with the South African government, or not? Your take, Marcia.
I think Marcia's gone now.
I heard her voice. Salam Media, is Marcia there or she's gone? No, I think she's gone. Okay, well, let me end there before I get scolded for being 4 minutes over time. Thank you all for this. Really, I mean, I think we could have gone on for another 2 hours, reminiscing and talking about the future, because that second part in particular we didn't focus enough on. So thank you for a really enlightening discussion, but also one that brought up lots of important memories and reignited, I think, for many of us, commitments that we made 20 years ago that, that many of us haven't fulfilled, that we need to push forward on. And particularly thanks to Marcia for making the effort to join us. And Marcia, we pray for your good health, and we hope that you'll fully recover in the next few days. Thank you all. Thank you to the listeners and viewers for joining us. I'm sure that Salam Media is going to take this issue further, and later this month,
Naeem,
when the discussion comes up at the United Nations, Salam Media will focus on that as well. Raji, since you are from Gaza, we'll allow you 10 seconds.
I would say the following. South Africa means for us quite a lot. And it's a place to inspire and learn, and we will follow the example. You made it, we will make it as well. In last month,
Inshallah,
B'Tselem in Israel and the Human Rights Watch issued two separate reports. They were saying Israel a new brand of apartheid. They said that 20 years after what we said, but it's good that the world saying that and confirming that, and we were ahead of them 20 years before.
yes.
3, ICC, International Criminal Court, and it's very essential, and I think we have to make a special focus on it. It's a place where we have superiority, moral superiority.
I think Raji is gone. We're hoping, of course, that the issue of apartheid with relation to Palestine in particular becomes an issue now, not only for civil society, but also at the United Nations General Assembly. So with that, let me thank everyone for this great discussion, and thanks to Salam Media and to our listeners and viewers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.